as a textbook example of the way you should do the politics and diplomacy of a problem like this, as well as the military side of it. So I don't think you can say one was more effective than the other. They were both really, if you look back on it, exceedingly effective. He was able to obtain international authority for what he did from the United Nations Security Council, the first time the Security Council really had acted in the manner that the founders intended for it to act since its formation, because of the Cold War rivalry between the Soviet Union and the United States. Before this, you would always have one or the other veto action that the other supported. The key to that was getting the Soviet Union on board immediately after Iraq invaded Kuwait on August the 3rd, 1990, when I flew to Moscow, and the Soviet Foreign Minister Shevardnadze supported an arms embargo joined with the United States and with me in an arms embargo against Iraq. So we were very pleased with the way it turned out. We felt that we were doing the right thing. I think history has proved that we were doing the right thing. I think the world, even though Saddam Hussein is still in power in Iraq, the world is a far better place today because of what was done. And even though Iraq is there and still has some military capabilities, it doesn't have nearly the military capabilities it had 10 years ago in terms of threatening its neighbors.
Well, of course, at the time that the liar Saddam Hussein, who had lied to President Mubarak of Egypt, had lied to King of Jordan, had lied to everybody in the area, but when he was proved to be a liar and had invaded Kuwait, my feeling was one of great anxiety and concern, first for the Kuwaiti people, and secondly for what this brutal aggression was doing to the Gulf. And I was very concerned about it, and so we immediately started figuring out what we could do about it.
The purpose of the meeting was to just make sure that we left no stone unturned, that history could not say to President Bush, you went to war, you took the nation to war, you took, in effect, the international community to war without ever sitting down face to face with the other side to see if you could get compliance with the Security Council resolutions without force, without war. So we had to have that meeting. But we never really expected that it was going to result in Iraq all of a sudden turning around and unconditionally leaving Kuwait after 5 months. They'd been there 5 months, if you remember. The occupation was August 2nd, 1990. The meeting with Tariq Aziz was January 9, 1991.
When the deadline came, the President signed the order to go ahead. What was your feeling at that moment?
Well, I knew at that moment that he was going to do that. I mean, there was never any doubt in my mind from January, from the end of the Tariq Aziz meeting until January 15th at midnight, there was never any doubt in my mind that we were going to go forward. We had moved 500,000 Americans to go. We had no other alternative but to go forward. We'd told the international community this is what we were going to do. We'd told the Security Council, and they'd said, yes, this is the right thing to do. So there was never any doubt.
But any time you have to commit somebody else's son or somebody else's daughter into harm's way, put them in a situation where they might be killed, the President must feel, I know I did, a certain personal responsibility for every one of our soldiers, and in this instance, every one of the coalition soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marine, you name it. And so there was a feeling of concern, but I also had a feeling of confidence based on what I had been told by our military that we were able to do. In fact, those that were killed in action were fewer by far than the military had told me they thought might be killed. And that, of course, was the most rewarding part of it, because of this feeling I have about every man and woman that's fighting under the American flag or an American uniform. And I felt the same way about the desert rats of the British and Saudi pilots or Egyptian guys. I mean, you don't differentiate, but I was concerned, but again, I had a quiet confidence because of my belief in my team.
We never really felt that an air war alone would do the job. We always, and our military people told us that that we really were never going to be able to finish it all, finish the job without putting some ground troops into action, and that turned out to be the case. But the air war was so effective that the ground war only took 100 hours. I mean, the Iraqi forces were pretty well decimated by the air war. Well, Iraq had the fourth largest army in the world. We had been told by the Soviets, who'd supplied many of their items of equipment and so forth. In fact, there's a section on this in my book, The Politics of Diplomacy, how I had the representative, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, show the Soviet foreign minister what we were going to do, took him through our war plans, something unheard of in the Cold War. And he said, you know, this is the fourth largest army in the world, they're very capable, so we really thought we were up against perhaps more than we were up against.
100 hours after the start of the ground war, the president decided it was over. A lot of critics argued then and up till now that the job was unfinished since Saddam Hussein is still in power, threatening his neighbors and his people. What's your comment on that?
Well, let me put it to you this way. It was certainly the right decision to take the action we did by building the coalition and by going through the United Nations to obtain the necessary international legitimacy and by ejecting Iraq from Kuwait, liberating Kuwait forcefully. Those were all the right decisions, and the world today, the world then and the world today are better off because of those decisions. He's still there, but he certainly doesn't represent the threat that he used to represent. Many people say, well, you should have gone on and changed out the Iraqi government. But the problem with that argument is when we built the 28-nation coalition, we promised we were not going to occupy Iraq. Many of the Arab members of the coalition, maybe not Kuwait, but other Arab members of the coalition, did not want us occupying that big Arab country. Our military wanted no part of occupying that big Arab country. And the people who said we should have done so were the very people here in the United States who voted against our going to war in the first place. Now they're second-guessing the fact that we didn't march all the way to Baghdad. The only way to get Saddam Hussein would have been to go to Baghdad. Many, many more American casualties. Our coalition would have frayed. The Arab members would have left. There would have been no Madrid peace conference. So for many reasons, it was the right decision. Changing out that government had never been a political aim or a war aim of the coalition. We were going to do what the UN Security Council authorized, and that is eject Iraq from Kuwait, and we did.
It raised it ex post facto. It didn't raise any controversy then. There wasn't anybody that said that we ought to keep fighting. And the reason was, the goal was not to kill Saddam Hussein. It damn sure wasn't to occupy Iraq. There was one goal, and it was defined in the international law under the UN regulations. It was defined that when I set the goal for the American forces, and that was kick this guy out of Kuwait, end the occupation of Kuwait. Now, 10 years later, because Saddam Hussein is there, people say, well, you didn't finish what you were supposed to do. Well, that's what we call in our country a Monday morning quarterback. Some guy that watches the game and then later on figures out that you should have done something differently. I don't believe that at all. And if we had gone into Baghdad, and we could have done it, my question to these Monday morning quarterbacks is, would you like your son or your daughter to be committed by the president to fight in an urban guerrilla warfare of going after a very secure tyrant? The coalition would have totally shattered, and the United States would be in there alone, an occupying power in an Arab land, proving exactly what Saddam Hussein said we wanted to do. So it's fine. Let these Monday morning quarterbacks criticize me or say we didn't finish the job. We did. We defined the mission and the aggression. And then the heroism of our troops and other troops in the coalition, did exactly that, and then we came home. So I have no concern. Now, am I happy he's there? Am I happy that he's still trying to get weapons of mass, destruction? Am I happy that he's still a bully in the neighborhood? No. I don't think he can invade Kuwait again. I know he can't. But he's behaving very badly, and I don't like that. But I don't think that means you change your mission to go, especially 10 years later when you can see he's still there. But I mean, that we should have changed our mission 10 years ago. I'd have been killed. The minute we started into Iraq, as I say, our coalition would have fallen apart, including the Arab countries. So let the critics have their say. I know that we did it right.
Did anyone expect him to stay in power all these years then?
Every Arab leader, every European leader told me they thought he couldn't stay in power. It's a good question. And I didn't think he could stay in power. But you know what? We underestimated his brutality of his own people, the way he puts down any people that will stand against him. And the brutality of this man to kind of funnel stuff into his military and brutalize people rather than feed his own children. We underestimated that. We underestimated how the survivability of this dictator.
Edge of the victory?
Well, would it have been better if he had not survived? Yes. Did all of our Arab coalition partners, every one of them tell us he would not survive? Yes. Every one of our Arab country coalition partners said he cannot survive a defeat of this magnitude. And yet he has. But he survived in a very constrained way.
What do you think is his capabilities to survive all these years?
Well, I think it was surprising to everybody that he survived that kind of a defeat. On the other hand, as I said, we made a conscious determination and a conscious decision not to go to Baghdad and take him and change out that government. Well, I think that you have to use all means that are available to you to constrain and contain the leadership today in Iraq, whether it's conventional aggression or the development and proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. The most dangerous thing in my view today, the biggest danger with respect to that regime today is its proclivity to develop weapons of mass destruction. And it's the people in the region who are going to suffer first from those weapons, not the United States, but we're the only country that can lead the world in containing proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. So we certainly should do it as far as Iraq is concerned.
Does Saddam Hussein still poses a threat to the region, and can anyone imagine history to repeat itself and we see such an aggression to occur in the new millennium?
Well, I think that he still represents a threat to the region and should be constrained and contained in any way possible. But I don't see it doesn't seem to me that there's going to be a repeat of what happened on August 2nd, 1990, even though they may be drawing maps today that include Kuwait, because I think that the resolve of the United States has been demonstrated, and the fact that the United States will indeed defend its access to the energy reserves of the Gulf is a given fact now, and I think he will take that into consideration before he would do anything like that.
One of them was when Iraqi prisoners came out of a foxhole, and they had been told by their leaders, including Saddam Hussein, that if they were captured, they would be tortured and killed by the Americans. So they're coming out of, there's pictures of it, they're coming out of their foxhole, and they have their hands in the air. And I don't know, they were talking Arabic, I don't speak that. But they're, please spare us, please spare us. An American sergeant standing there looking down at these pathetic soldiers that had been left to die by their own leader. They'd been told we were going to win, and they get kicked from day one. And they come out like this, we surrender, and the American soldier said, we're not going to hurt you. We're American soldiers. We're not going to do anything to you. And that was a very proud moment for me, because we weren't trying to kill Iraqi soldiers. Somebody said to me, you ought to keep the war going. You should have kept it going 1 day more. You could have killed a lot of soldiers running away up the highway of death. It's not the way we fight. That's not the way I see the use of American military. You don't measure the success by how many you kill, how many bodies of fleeing, pathetic soldiers trying to run away, just shoot them down like a turkey shoot. You don't do that. Not if you have the way, my view of how the military should work. So those pictures mean a lot to me. And of course, some of the images when one of the worst was when a young boy had been passing out leaflets in Kuwait, 14-year-old kid or something, and the Iraqis captured him, and they go to his home, and they knock on the door, and they say, we're bringing your son home. And the mother and father rush out of their home, and the boy's kneeling on the street, and the Iraqi soldier puts a bullet in the back of this young boy's head. That's an image I'll never forget. And that's an image that should stay with Saddam Hussein till the day he dies. Taking babies out of incubators and having the incubators sent away from Kuwait up into Iraq. We forget this. We forget that there are a lot of Kuwaiti prisoners, people that were taken away that have never been accounted for. We forget that he agreed to reparations and has failed to do it. And I'm sorry, but these are the images that I have in my mind.
I don't think much more could have been done with respect to Kuwaiti POWs. We still have resolutions out. Sanctions are still in force against Iraq that apply to the Kuwaiti prisoners of war that are in place because Iraq has not complied with its obligations respecting Kuwaiti POWs.
Of course, I knew Saddam was lying when he said they were withdrawing. He made a big announcement to the world and said, we're withdrawing. But we had intelligence showing that he was not only not withdrawing, that he was moving his forces south towards Saudi Arabia. And so, we weren't dumb. We weren't stupid. He tried to convince the world of this, get the Yankee aggressors out of Arab soil. At the same time he was saying he was pulling back, he was going the other way. Then we got a call from Gorbachev, said, we have it on good authority that Saddam Hussein will withdraw, but you got to stop the fighting, stop the bombing and all that. I said, no. He knows how he got in there. And just tell him this. Tell him to put all their weapons down and walk out. And we're not going to shoot fleeing soldiers with no weapons. So put their weapons down and leave. Well, of course, Saddam Hussein didn't want to do that. He still thought he could win the mother of all battles. Well, I think from time to time, there's threats from Iraq, but I think as long as the United States keeps its commitment to Kuwait, I don't think they have anything really serious to worry about. I don't believe that the Iraqi forces could invade Kuwait again like they did. They're not that strong. The fourth largest army has been reduced to something far less of a serious threat, but they got to keep their guard up. And every time I go there, I go out and see the American airmen and people that are holding high the banner of freedom for Kuwait. Oh, I don't know. I'm going to let the historians decide that. They can figure out my mistakes, of which I'm sure there were plenty, and they can figure out what we did right. I'd like to be remembered that we saved a tiny country. With the help of others, we saved a tiny country that if we hadn't moved would have been history, would have been just wiped out, and that we stabilized a very important area in the country, in the world, the Gulf, because if we hadn't moved against Saddam, he would have gone swept right into Saudi Arabia, and you'd have had a tyrant controlling the Gulf. So I think history will be pretty kind to us, not just me. I mean, heaven's sakes, we had all this fantastic support from my team domestically and internationally. Strong allies. Mitterrand proved to be strong. John Major was the best And then we had allies in the Middle East, like Ozal of Turkey and like Mubarak of Egypt. For the Saudis, to have U.S. forces based there against their years of history and cultural change, you know, and I think it was wonderful. So I'd like to be remembered as a person that moved properly in the Gulf through the United Nations, through diplomacy, through forming a coalition, and then through fighting to have done the job. But there's other things I'm happy about domestically. I won't bore you with them. I think I served with honor as the presidency of the United States. And of course, one thing I'd like to be remembered for is as the father of the 43rd President of the United States.
I think the Kuwaiti-American relationship is very strong, still as strong as it was 10 years ago. Although I haven't been in government for 8 years, I think it's still a very good relationship, a strong relationship. I still have many, many close personal friends in the government of Kuwait and in Kuwait. I still travel from time to Kuwait, and I enjoy doing so. And I think the relationship is solid and very firm and very good.
What are the lessons Americans and others have learned from the Gulf War and liberation?
Well, I think there are a couple of lessons. One is that one lesson I would hope that has been learned is that to the extent that you can move in concert with other nations, you have more political and diplomatic support around the world for what you're going to do. When you compare what was done in the Gulf with what was done in Kosovo, under American leadership in both cases, what was done in the Gulf built America's leadership role in the world and redounded to our benefit and the benefit of many other countries in the world politically. What was done in Kosovo didn't work that way. It may have been the right thing to do as a matter of right, but it may not have been done in exactly the right way. I think that's one lesson. Another lesson is that unprovoked aggression really should not be allowed to stand, particularly where you couple the violation of that principle and value, which is a value we hold quite dearly, with a national interest, such as access to the energy reserves.
I know their leaders. I have respect for the leadership. I feel a kinship to the people there because we saved their lives. We restored their country. And they have been very gracious to me when I go there in terms of gestures of friendship and all of this. But there's nothing other than that. And it's very emotional. Here we are on the 10th anniversary of the liberation of Kuwait. And I still get emotional about it because I know we did the right thing. As I say, you got a lot of critics, you got a lot of people that are young in our country that forget what it is for a brutal country to take over a neighbor. But we did the right thing, and I'll go to my grave with great satisfaction over that.
Well, nothing except best wishes to the Kuwaiti people and to the government of Kuwait, who are still, for whom we still have a warm spot in our hearts, those of us who were involved at the time of the Gulf War. And we continue to remember the warmth with which we were greeted in Kuwait when we came to Kuwait after the Gulf War.